Tigers, the largest and arguably the most charismatic large cats on earth. And today is a special day, 29 July. It is celebrated the world over as the Global Tiger Day. Since 2010, when 13 tiger range countries met in St. Petersburg to sign a declaration to double tiger numbers by 2022. Since then, India has done exceedingly well in achieving this target. Hi, I'm Anish Andheria.
Hi, my name is Dr. Chet Trivedi.
Dr. Prashant Deshmukh.
This is Aditya, Joshi.
My name is Vijay.
Why are tigers important? A lot of people keep asking conservationists like me as to why do you keep talking about tigers? Aren't other animals equally important? Well, tigers are top carnivores. They are the top predators. They sit on the top of the food chain. To have good number of tigers, you have to have good quality habitat. And tigers are large ranging, which means a tiger can have a territory of more than 50 square kilometers. A female will have a smaller territory, which is also dependent on the quality and abundance of prey. So India has many different types of habitats, and therefore the density of tigers varies from nearly 17 to 18 tigers per 100 square kilometers in Kaziranga and Corbett Tiger Reserve to about 2 or 3 tigers per 100 square kilometers in the northern Western Ghats. So if you want good number of tigers, you need good habitat, and if you are able to protect that habitat, automatically all species of plants and animals that occupy that habitat also do well. So tiger is a proxy to protect all kinds of wild animals and plants. So when somebody talks about tigers, they are not only talking about one animal, they're talking about an ecosystem. The tiger is a symbol for tropical woodlands. So in India, because of the effort put in by the government, and also most importantly our culture, which is very, very intricately woven with nature, something which is probably impossible has been achieved. The tiger population has doubled even as human population has gone up drastically. The Wildlife Conservation Trust recognizes the importance of large carnivores, and that's the reason why we work in estimating tiger densities not only inside tiger reserves but also along the corridors. We work in about 160 national parks and sanctuaries across 23 states. We carry out tiger population estimation in some of the major corridors in the central Indian landscape and also along the Western Ghats. What do we know from those estimations? Those estimations tell us which are those areas where tigers are breeding, which are those corridors that they are taking to disperse. Tigers by nature disperse. Male tigers, young male tigers can walk up to 600-700 kilometers to find the right habitat and territory. And so through this estimation, we understand which are those best areas for tigers, which are those areas which are vulnerable, which are the bottlenecks, which means if you have a corridor and then you have linear infrastructure cutting through the corridor, you have a mine, you have a dam, you have huge human population, then it becomes very difficult for the tiger to move from one area to another. So through our studies, through the research that we conduct, we understand which are the best areas for animals, and not only tigers but also other prey and other co-predators like leopards, wolves, hyenas, jackals and so on and so forth. We also give recommendations to the state governments and the center to focus on these bottlenecks so that people and large carnivores can coexist in the same habitat. We work on human-wildlife conflict to see how the interaction between people and large carnivores can be reduced. So we work to understand the kind of behavior change that is needed so that you have a win-win on both the side of maintaining tiger populations as well as prosperity in communities.
So a tiger is a large carnivore, as we all know, and it's a long-ranging species. So based on our genetic data, we know that tigers can disperse over 600 kilometers. And when we talk about conservation of any long-ranging species, especially a large carnivore like tiger, it is important to look at it at a landscape scale. So our tiger genetics work in the Central Indian landscape in collaboration with the National Center for Biological Sciences highlighted the importance of forest blocks outside protected area network and the critical role that they play in maintaining a viable and healthy metapopulation of tigers. So now the general notion is that protected areas are sources where tigers breed and then they disperse out, and these corridors and outside protected area forest blocks are used by tigers to move from one PA to other, and these corridors cannot support tigers, and that's where most of the tigers die. But a long-term tiger monitoring exercise using systematic camera trap based surveys in the state of Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh, we know that there are resident breeding population of tigers even outside protected areas, and some of these forest blocks support tiger densities which are comparable to some of the protected areas in the Central Indian landscape. And these patches of forest in the corridor areas, along with the neighboring tiger reserve or a PA, act as a meta-population. So there is a lot of immigration and emigration both to and from protected area as well as outside protected area forest blocks. So there have been instances where tigers from corridor areas have moved to a neighboring PA where there weren't any tigers and established a founding population over there, and now you have breeding tigers in those protected areas as well. So a sink is actually acting as a source for even protected areas where there weren't any tigers. Now if you look at the average home ranges of protected areas in India, it's relatively small, and the home ranges of tigers and the dispersing ability of tigers is quite large as compared to that. And when we talk about corridors, these are basically multiple use areas where there is a lot of human dependence on these forests for fuel wood, grazing, anti-FP collection. And the general quality of the habitat is relatively low as compared to that of a protected area. And the prey densities are also quite low. So naturally, there is a lot of dependence on livestock where there are tigers in these forest blocks outside protected areas. So one of the major limiting factors for the long-term viability of tiger population is the availability of habitat. Now our study, which looked at simulations using genetic and GIS data, show that the extinction rate of tigers in small PAs can be reduced by 70% by securing adjacent forest areas and corridors. So most of the tiger conservation focus is on tiger numbers, but we have to also look at availability of prey densities and habitat, and that is one goal that cannot be achieved without protecting corridors. So the future of large carnivores, especially like tigers in developing nation and in human dominated landscape, is in securing habitats to maintain structural and functional connectivity. The ability of tigers to inhabit new areas will be governed by the extent of anthropogenic pressure and the quality of habitats outside protected areas.
In Madhya Pradesh, some tigers are translocated from their natal area or rehabilitated for the management of negative human-tiger interaction. These translocated tigers are to be monitored till they settle down at the site of release. Satellite collars are deployed on tigers to monitor their movements across large inaccessible landscapes. Satellite telemetry offers the function of remotely monitoring the animal at a defined time scale without getting into the field. Once the tiger is collared, the monitoring task is divided between two teams. With a very high frequency receiver, the ground tracking team follows the tiger at an appropriate distance. Scientists and wildlife managers monitor the geolocation data received via satellite to understand the tiger's behavior. We share real time information via closed WhatsApp group between the ground tracking team and the team monitoring the geolocation data. For example, the team tracking geolocations will report the clustering of geolocations as a probable kill site to the ground tracking team. Ground tracking team will remain nearby and report back on the species of the kill after the tiger has moved. Wildlife managers and conservationists use this behavioral information to improve the success of tiger translocations and rehabilitation in Madhya Pradesh with data-driven interventions.
We may be familiar with all the hard work that conservation groups are doing across the world to save iconic species such as the tiger, but we hear less about the impact of human health that has a knock-on effect upon conservation of wildlife. You may be familiar with the term One Health, and I think this term is growing. The term One Health means that the health of people, the health of wildlife, and the health of the environment are all interlinked. The Wildlife Conservation Trust of India has actually taken a 360 approach to conservation, and that means looking at the impact of human health and how that impacts our conservation efforts. One of the questions I've been asked to speak about is how, by prioritising the health of our frontline forest staff, and these are the men and women who work in the forests day and night, patrolling, securing the forests, preventing poaching, preventing illegal logging, preventing illegal wildlife crime. How is their health going to impact upon their ability to carry out their conservation activity? We're lucky at WCT that we have made a lot of investment in actually looking at this area in huge depth, probably more depth than any other group that has worked on health. And what we have done is we've started by listening to the men and women on the front line. We have visited over 16 tiger reserves across 11 states and interviewed over 1,500 people to understand their health needs, their health challenges, and what we can do to make their health better, to make their health safer, and actually how do we then make their work more productive. We found across our work that a lot of the people, the rangers, the forest guards, had been involved in trauma, had been affected by animal attacks, car accidents, suffered from malaria and dengue, all sorts of conditions that we may not be familiar with when we live where we are across the world. But these people, these men and women on the front line, are acutely exposed to these conditions. And our role at WCT is actually helping to understand the impact of these conditions and what we can do in terms of training, resources, and equipment to keep them safe in the field. WCT has also been looking at preventative health. Many of us take healthcare access for granted. We can actually make an appointment with our doctor. We may even be able to get a doctor online or over the phone. But the challenges of accessing healthcare when you're living in the jungle and working in the forest is difficult. We found that some of the forest guards had to travel large distances to access healthcare in the event of a snake bite or if they had an accident, or if they were having chest pain. So what we did is we did preventative health checks on forest guards, and our data has been staggering. We found that large numbers were undiagnosed diabetics. We found people that had high blood pressure, who were obese, had high cholesterol. So through our engagement with forest guards and the forest departments, we've actually using preventative health measures to improve their health, to prevent diseases like diabetes, blood pressure, and even mouth cancer, which is secondary to high levels of tobacco chewing and betel nut chewing, Bahan Sabari. So these are some of the things where WCT has taken the lead globally in actually trying to understand the health of forest staff and trying to develop interventions to mitigate this health. One of the things that we are about to launch is a bespoke health app for forest staff, where a member of the forest team can actually download the app and actually get all sorts of useful health resources in terms of what to do in an emergency, also and in addition to preventative health information on how to stay healthier in the field. And also, we also have built in a feature where it tells them where their nearest health facility is in case of an emergency. So in a nutshell, we have a positive outlook for health in conservation. WCT are putting health at the heart of conservation, where it belongs, and we look forward to doing more work to keep the front line safe, which in fact will keep the forest safe, which will in turn keep the tigers safe, so we can enjoy this beautiful iconic species for future International Tiger Days to come. Thank you very much.
Wildlife crime is one of the largest global smuggling crimes. It ranks alongside the trade in narcotics, in arms, and in human beings. It's estimated at about $23 billion annually. India, given its rich biodiversity, is an important source country in the large network for illegal wildlife trade across the globe. We have multiple species, but what we must be most proud of is that we have the largest population of wild tigers in the world. Tigers are in great demand in international markets, especially in countries like China and Southeast Asia, where they are used as part of traditional Chinese medicine. Every part of the tiger's body, down to its whiskers, its bones, its skin, are used to treat ailments such as baldness or cancer, anemia. However, there is no scientific backing to show that they actually help with these conditions. Now, India has some of the strongest laws for wildlife conservation. India's Wildlife Protection Act grants the tiger the highest degree of protection under the law, and offences against the species, including poaching, trade, or an attempt to trade, are punishable with up to 7 years in prison. We also have the provisions of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, under which wildlife trade is a predicate offence. What this means is that when wildlife parts and products are traded, the proceeds of that crime can be the subject of a case of money laundering, and the Enforcement Directorate can take cognizance of it and have the powers to freeze the assets of the trafficker and thereafter to forfeit that money. While we have fantastic laws, we really need to work harder on better implementing these laws. For instance, the provisions of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act have only seen one conviction for a wildlife trade case in 20 years, which speaks volumes about the need for better implementation of our laws. The conviction rate for cases under the Wildlife Protection Act, according to the National Crime Records Bureau, is about 7%, which is abysmally low. At the Wildlife Conservation Trust, we recognize the need to work with frontline forest departments. Frontline forest staff are the custodians of our forests, but they're also overworked and have multifarious responsibilities. One of these responsibilities is to enforce the Wildlife Protection Act. WCT, in its efforts to bolster the Forest Department's work on enforcing the Wildlife Act, conducts capacity building programs for the staff. The capacity building workshops are aimed at simplifying the law and providing a better chance at making a watertight case that will stand scrutiny in a court of law. We also work with other stakeholders like the judiciary and with lawyers in the hope of making sure that we are well-rounded in our approach to having better conviction rates. We're already seeing the fruits of our labor slowly now. For instance, judgments from the Central Indian landscape in wildlife crime cases often take a really compassionate view towards wildlife in the way that they pen their judgments, which is very encouraging to see. Over the past 14 years, our work with over 16,000 frontline Forest Department staff across states in India are beginning to show results and are really encouraging, especially because they leave us with the message that capacity building and working closely with frontline forest staff can have positive conservation action.
So on this important day, I urge the listeners to spend some time, whenever they get some time, go to the forest, try and understand how these different animals interact, and you will see that tiger forests are loaded with plethora of birds, some amazing plant species, insects, and so many different mammals. Every time you see a river flow, you should know that the forest upstream is responsible for the gurgling fresh water that you see in the streams. So tiger are a symbol not only for the health of the forest and the rivers, but also human beings' resolve to fight climate change.